The bride who discovered her new husband was also her brother in 1930 Germany. Snow fell like ash that morning, soft, endless, and silent. The village of Falkenberg, tucked deep in the Bavarian hills, looked more like a painting than a real place. Every rooftop was white. Every chimney sent up threads of smoke that curled into the frozen air. Inside the stone church at the center of town, candles flickered against stained glass, and the air smelled of pine, wax, and winter roses. The bride stood at the altar, her gloved hands trembling around a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her name was Elise Hartmann, 22 years old, raised by a foster family who'd always called her their miracle child. She had waited years for this day, for the moment she could walk down the aisle and start her own family. But as the priest began to speak, she felt something stir, a cold weight in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Outside, a horse-drawn sleigh stopped in front of the church. A stranger stepped out. He wore a long black coat, snow melting off the brim of his hat. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He didn't enter right away. He simply stood there, watching through the frosted glass. Inside, the ceremony went on. Her groom, Friedrich, looked every bit the perfect husband. Tall, kind eyes, a voice that made her feel safe. They had met only 8 months before in the spring markets of Munich. He had come to buy books. She had been selling wildflowers. Their meeting had felt fated, like a story written long before either of them was born. Now, as he slid the gold ring onto her finger, a chill ran through her. She glanced toward the back of the church. The stranger was gone. Only a faint shadow remained on the glass. When the final amen echoed through the stone walls, bells rang out across the valley. Guests clapped, smiled, wept. The couple stepped outside, and snowflakes clung to Elise's veil like stars. For a brief moment, everything felt pure, beautiful, eternal. Then, as they entered the reception hall, a wooden barn lit with strings of candles, a folded envelope appeared on Elise's plate. Her name, written in precise, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. No seal. She opened it quietly beneath the table. Inside was a single sentence. "Do you know who you really are?" Her heart stopped. The paper trembled in her hands. She looked around, but no one seemed to notice. Guests were drinking, laughing, toasting the new couple. Friedrich was busy thanking the musicians. She folded the letter and slipped it into her sleeve. As the night deepened, she tried to forget it. She danced. She smiled. But the stranger's face, pale, watching, wouldn't leave her mind. By midnight, snow was falling harder. When the last guests had left and the barn stood silent, she noticed muddy footprints near the back door. Not from boots, from bare feet. Her breath caught. She followed them outside, into the cold. The prints led to the edge of the woods, where they simply stopped. No person, no sound, just trees whispering under the weight of snow. Friedrich called after her, asking what was wrong. She turned, forcing a smile. "Nothing," she said, but her voice shook. That night, as they lay in bed, Elise couldn't sleep. The letter burned in her thoughts. The words seemed to whisper through the dark. "Do you know who you really are?" And when dawn came, she made a silent decision. She would find out, even if it meant uncovering something she could never forget. Morning light crept through the frost-laced window, spilling across the small bedroom like a confession. Elise hadn't slept. She lay awake, still hearing that question echo in her mind. "Do you know who you really are?" Beside her, Friedrich slept peacefully, his breathing soft and steady. He looked innocent in sleep, boyish even, and yet something about him now felt distant, unreachable. Elise studied his face as if searching for a clue she hadn't seen before. Downstairs, the innkeeper was stoking the fire. The smell of bread and coffee filled the air. Elise rose quietly, pulled on her coat, and stepped out into the snow-covered street. Her footsteps crunched in the silence. The village was still asleep, except for a milk cart creaking by and the distant toll of a bell. Her destination was the post office, a small wooden building by the church, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. The clerk, an old man with clouded eyes, looked up as she entered. "Good morning, Frau Hartmann," he said cheerfully. "Or should I say Frau Muller now?" She smiled faintly but said nothing. He rummaged through a wooden drawer and frowned. "Curious," he murmured. "A letter came for you last week. No return address. I was meaning to send it along after the wedding." Elise's heart skipped. "May I see it?" He handed her a small, yellowed envelope tied with a bit of string. Her name was written in the same careful script as the note from last night. Outside, she tore it open. The paper inside was fragile, the ink faded but legible. It read, "Elise, I do not know if this will reach you. You were too young to remember me, but I remember you. They told me you died in the fire at the orphanage, but I never believed them. If you are alive, you must be careful. There are things about your birth no one ever told you. A friend." Her hands trembled as she read it again. An orphanage. A fire. None of this made sense. Her foster parents had always told her she'd been found wandering alone after the war. No memory of her parents, no name, nothing. She walked to the edge of a square, where the old church bell hung silent and cracked. Across from it stood the town's records office, the place where marriage licenses, births, and adoptions were filed. She hesitated before stepping inside. The clerk inside, a young woman with round spectacles, looked up politely. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for records," Elise said softly. "From 1912 to 1918. An orphanage, St. Maria's Home, near Regensburg." The woman flipped through ledgers, frowning as she traced her finger along a list. "That orphanage burned down in 1915. Records are incomplete." She turned a page, then paused. But there was one survivor listed as missing, an infant girl, age 2. The name column says, Elise. Elise's breath caught. "No last name." The woman shook her head. "None. Only a note. Brother unaccounted for." Brother. The word hit her like ice water. As she left the office, the wind howled through the streets, rattling the shutters. She pressed the letter against her chest. Somewhere, someone had known her. Someone had lied about her past. When she returned home, Friedrich was waiting by the window. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were unreadable. "Where did you go so early?" he asked. "Just for a walk," she said. His gaze lingered a moment too long. "In this weather?" She nodded, forcing a smile. That night, when he kissed her goodnight, she tasted something bitter in the air, like fear. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had married was about to become part of the very mystery she was trying to solve. And before the week was over, another letter would arrive, this time with a photograph inside. The second letter came 3 days later. It arrived not by post, but slipped beneath the door sometime before dawn, so quietly that neither Elise nor Friedrich had heard a sound. When she found it, the morning fog still clung to the window panes, blurring the world outside. The envelope was damp, the ink smeared, as if carried through the snow by trembling hands. Inside was a small photograph, curled at the edges, black and white, its surface cracked like old skin. 2 children stood in front of a grand stone building. The boy looked slightly older, perhaps 4 or 5, holding the hand of a little girl with wide, uncertain eyes. But where their faces should have been, someone had scratched them out, deep, violent lines carved into the photo until only pale ovals remained. Beneath it, a short note, "You were there. Find the truth before he does." Her breath hitched. Before he does. Elise sat frozen at the kitchen table, the fire in the hearth burning low. Outside, snow was falling again, silent and thick, covering everything like a shroud. Friedrich was still asleep upstairs, his footsteps heavy when he moved in dreams. She turned the photo over. On the back, faint pencil marks read, "St. Maria's Orphanage, Regensburg, 1914. The same orphanage from the letter. She felt her pulse race. Someone knew. Someone was following her. And somehow they were connected to her new husband. Later that morning, she tucked the photo into her coat and walked to the village library. It was a small, drafty room inside an old schoolhouse, run by a quiet man named Becker. He'd been there since before the war, his memory a vault of forgotten stories. When Elise showed him the photograph, his face went pale. He leaned closer, squinting. St. Maria's, he murmured. That building was destroyed 20 years ago. But I remember it. There was a fire, terrible one. Many children died. Do you remember their names? Elise asked. He shook his head slowly. Only one. A boy named Wilhelm. He was said to have survived, but no one ever found him. Wilhelm, she repeated quietly, tasting the name like it meant something. Do you remember anything else about him? Becker looked uneasy. Only that he was taken by a traveling couple after the fire. A childless pair who disappeared soon after. Some said they fled the country. Some said the boy wasn't really theirs to take. Elise's hands went cold. And the girl? No one ever spoke of her again. She thanked him, though her voice barely came out. As she stepped back into the street, wind sliced through her coat. The church bells tolled in the distance, their sound dull and heavy. That evening, she returned home early. The house was dark. Only one candle burned on the table, and beside it, Friedrich's coat was gone. She waited. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, near midnight, she heard the crunch of boots outside. Friedrich entered, dusted with snow, his expression calm but distant. "Where have you been?" she asked softly. He hesitated, removing his gloves. "Work. Business with a friend." She noticed a smear of dirt on his sleeve, and something else. A faint burnt scent, like smoke clinging to wool. "Have you been near fire?" she asked. He looked up sharply, almost startled. Then he smiled too quickly. Just the forge. Nothing to worry about. That night, after he slept, Elise crept downstairs and examined his coat pocket. Inside, she found a folded scrap of newspaper, an article clipped from Der Münchner. The headline read, "Remains found at site of former St. Maria's orphanage. Investigation reopened." Her heart pounded. The date on the paper was only a week old. When she looked again at the photograph, the scratched-out faces seemed almost to move in the candlelight, as if trying to tell her something through the ruined paper. And for the first time, Elise wondered if the person she'd married hadn't been looking for love at all. But for her, it began with a sound, a creak from the floorboards above, followed by the slow, deliberate closing of a door. Elise froze by the hearth, clutching the photograph. Her husband, Friedrich, was home again far earlier than usual. The air felt tight with the weight of what she now knew, or rather, what she feared. She tucked the photograph under the woodpile and turned just as he entered the room. He smiled faintly, but his eyes looked restless, almost hunted. "Up so early again," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I couldn't sleep." He poured himself a cup of coffee, then sat across from her, his sleeve brushing the edge of the table. There, in the candlelight, she noticed something she hadn't before, the initials WM sewn discreetly inside his cuff. Elise frowned. "Those aren't yours," she said softly. Friedrich froze, mid-sip. "What?" "Your initials. They're not FM, they're WM." For a fraction of a second, his eyes flickered with something dark. Then he smiled, too casually. "Old coat," he said. "Belonged to a cousin, Wilhelm. He passed some years ago." The name made her heart stop. Wilhelm. The same name the librarian had mentioned. She forced a smile. "I see." But inside, her mind was spinning. That evening, when he went to meet friends in the nearby town, Elise followed. The road wound through a line of bare trees, their black branches like ribs against the gray sky. She kept her distance, her boots silent in the snow. He stopped at a small tavern by the river, a place where the air smelled of smoke and stale beer. Through the frosted window, she saw him speaking with a man in uniform. Papers changed hands. Money followed. Friedrich's face was tense, his gestures sharp. After half an hour, he left. Elise waited until he disappeared into the fog, then slipped inside. The barkeep eyed her warily. "You looking for someone?" "The man who was just here," she said. Tall, dark coat. The barkeep hesitated. "He told me his name was Wilhelm Muller. Said he used to work with the orphan transport in Regensburg before the fire." "Why?" Elise's stomach dropped. Wilhelm Muller. Her husband had lied about everything, even his name. The barkeep leaned closer. Funny thing, he added. He asked about a girl once. Said she'd gone missing after the orphanage burned. A sister, I think. Didn't say much else. Elise could barely breathe. She thanked him, stepped outside, and gripped the frozen railing by the river. The current beneath was black and fast, shards of ice swirling like broken glass. By the time she returned home, Friedrich was sitting by the fire, his eyes fixed on her. "You've been gone a long time," he said softly. She met his gaze, steady but terrified. "So have you." Neither spoke after that. The only sound was the slow, steady crackle of burning wood. That night, when he finally fell asleep, Elise crept into his study. The small desk by the window was neat, too neat. But in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath folded letters, she found a birth record. The paper was old, edges singed. The name written there made her hand tremble. Wilhelm Hartmann, born March 2nd, 1912. St. Maria's Orphanage. Sister unaccounted for. Hartmann. Her own surname. She stumbled back, gasping, her mind reeling. The truth twisted inside her like a knife. The man she had married, the man sleeping just a room away, was her brother. Tears blurred her vision as she covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Every memory, every kiss, every moment of tenderness, shattered in her mind like glass. She wanted to run, to vanish into the snow. But something stopped her, a thought, sharp and cruel. If he knew the truth, why had he married her? And if he didn't, who was sending the letters warning her before he found out? The morning after Elise's discovery felt like waking inside a nightmare. The air in the house seemed heavier. Every creak, every gust of wind through the chimney carried a pulse of dread. She could hardly look at Friedrich without trembling. He moved about their home as if nothing had changed, unaware that his wife now knew the secret buried beneath his name. When he left for town that afternoon, Elise wasted no time. She packed a shawl, the photograph, and the letters, then took the narrow road toward the neighboring village, the one where she'd been told the last surviving nurse from St. Maria's Orphanage still lived. The woman's name was Greta Vogel, once a midwife who'd helped deliver countless children during the war years. She now lived alone in a sagging wooden house on the outskirts, half swallowed by ivy. Elise found her sitting by a fire, wrapped in layers of blankets, her hands trembling with age. "You've come about St. Maria's," Greta said before Elise could even speak. Her eyes were cloudy, but sharp with memory. "They always come sooner or later." Elise's voice quivered. "You knew the orphanage?" The old woman gave a hollow laugh. "Knew it? I was there the night it burned." Elise stepped closer. "Then you must remember me. I was told I came from there, that I had a brother." Greta's expression softened. "Elise," she whispered, as if the name were a ghost. "So it's true. You survived." Elise's knees nearly gave out. "Then it's real, everything I was told." The woman shook her head slowly. "Not everything. The truth is worse than you think." Greta leaned forward, the firelight trembling across her face. There was an evacuation early 1915. The war was closing in. Bombs, fires, panic. People fleeing with whatever children they could carry. I was helping deliver 2 infants that night. Twins, born to a woman who died in childbirth. A nurse and I were ordered to separate them, one to be sent north to safety, the other left behind with the church registry. They were marked as orphans, no family name. But then the orphanage burned before the second child could be evacuated. Elise's breath came shallow. "Twins." "Yes," Greta said weakly. "A boy and a girl. You and your brother." Tears welled in Elise's eyes. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Greta's hand shook. "Because someone paid for silence." After the fire, officials falsified the records. One of the orphans, the boy, was claimed by a couple who disappeared to avoid questions. Years later, I heard he returned under a new name. Elise's voice dropped to a whisper. "Wilhelm Muller." The old woman nodded slowly. "So he found you, didn't he?" Elise couldn't answer. Her throat tightened. Greta's eyes filled with pity. "He may not have known. When I was told to switch the birth certificates, I hesitated. I thought I was saving you both from starvation, from the war. I never imagined you'd find each other again, like this." A gust of wind rattled the shutters, scattering ash from a fire. Greta coughed violently, her body shaking. Elise knelt beside her, holding her trembling hands. "There's one more thing," Greta rasped. Someone else knew. A priest from St. Maria's, Father Ehlers. He kept the baptism records. If they still exist, they'll be in the ruins near Regensburg. But you must hurry, child. If your husband discovers, she didn't finish. Her chest heaved once, and then she went still, her head falling back against the chair. The fire crackled on, indifferent. Elise sat frozen beside the body, tears streaming down her face. The smell of smoke and death filled the small room. She whispered a prayer, not for the dead woman, but for herself. Because now she knew the truth. And somewhere Friedrich or Wilhelm would soon know it too. Outside, the snow had turned to rain. And in that cold gray downpour, Elise began the journey to the ruins of St. Maria's orphanage. But she wasn't alone. Behind her in the distance, a dark figure followed, moving with the slow, patient steps of someone who already knew where she was going. Rain blurred the road like smeared ink, swallowing the horizon. Elise walked alone, her cloak soaked, her boots sinking into the mud of the old country path. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of German winter that seemed to erase all color from the world. It took her nearly a full day to reach the outskirts of Regensburg. By the time she arrived, the sun had vanished behind thick clouds, leaving only the dim orange of distant lamps. At the edge of town stood what remained of St. Maria's orphanage, or rather, what had become of it. The fire had devoured most of the main structure decades earlier. What stood now was a husk, charred stone walls, collapsed beams, windows gaping like hollow eyes. Wild vines had grown over the ruins, twisting through broken doorways. But a faded sign still clung to the gate, its letters half-burned. St. Maria's Home for Children. Founded 1897, Elise stepped through the gate. The metal moaned in protest. Inside, silence pressed against her like a weight. No birds, no wind, just the faint dripping of rain through holes in the roof. Her lantern's glow flickered against the blackened walls. The air smelled of mold, soot, and time. She moved cautiously, brushing her fingers over scorched bricks as she passed what had once been the nursery. Tiny rusted beds still lined the walls, their frames bent from heat. Dolls lay half buried in dust. Every step felt like walking into her own forgotten life. Near the back, she found a corridor leading to the basement, where records were once kept. The stairs creaked under her weight, and with each step, the air grew colder. She reached the bottom, her lantern barely cutting through the dark. The room was littered with collapsed shelves and ashes. Yet on one wall, something caught her eye, faint marks scratched into the plaster. She held the light closer. There, carved in shaky handwriting, were the words, Elise H.N.W. Her breath hitched. Her name. His initial. She touched the letters, tracing the grooves with her trembling fingers. The moment she did, a wave of memory struck, blurred flashes of heat, fire, a woman's voice screaming for help, the sound of a boy crying somewhere close. She stumbled back, gasping. And then footsteps. Soft, deliberate, echoing down the hall above. Elise blew out the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed her whole. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. The footsteps grew closer, slow, heavy, careful. Someone was searching. A beam of light cut through the cracks in the floorboards above, a lantern. She heard a man's voice calling softly. Elise, are you here? Friedrich. Her throat tightened. How had he found her? The light moved past, and for a moment she thought he was leaving. But then the stairs groaned. He was coming down. She backed away silently, her hands groping for an exit. In the corner, half buried under fallen debris, she spotted a wooden door, small, barely large enough to crawl through. She pulled it open and slipped inside, just as his lantern light reached the bottom step. From her hiding place, she saw him sweep the room with his light. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. But his voice, it trembled when he spoke. "Elise, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." He walked slowly toward the wall, the same wall where their names were carved. His hand brushed over it, and he froze. For a moment, he simply stared, then turned sharply, eyes scanning the dark. "Elise," he said again, more softly this time. "Who told you?" She bit her lip to keep from making a sound. After a long silence, he sighed, a deep, shuddering breath. "You should have left it buried." Then he turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps fading until there was only rain again. Elise waited, motionless, until she was sure he was gone. Then she crawled out, shaking. Her lantern had gone out, but a faint light filtered through a gap in the collapsed wall. She followed it and discovered a hidden chamber, small, sealed, untouched by fire. Inside were stacks of water-damaged papers, baptism records, lists of children, names. She rifled through them until she found one that made her stop cold. Wilhelm Hartmann, twin to Elise Hartmann. Born March 2, 1912. Baptized March 5. Parents unknown. The final note at the bottom read, "Transferred under order of Father Ehlers to care of Dieter and Anna Miller, December 1915. Her husband's adoptive parents." Tears blurred her sight. She sank to her knees, clutching the paper to her chest. Now there was no doubt. Friedrich was Wilhelm. But the note also contained one more line, barely legible through the stains. Record copied for Church Archive, Asylum Branch, Rosenfeld. The Rosenfeld Asylum. If any hope of understanding their twisted fates remained, it was there, in that final archive, sealed away with the mad and the forgotten. And somewhere above the ruins, she thought she saw him again, standing in the rain, watching the orphanage smolder like a ghost from memory. Elise reached Rosenfeld Asylum at dawn, her body numb from cold and fear. The journey had taken her 2 days through endless snow, the sky the color of slate. By the time the building appeared through the mist, it didn't look like a hospital at all, more like a mausoleum for the living. Tall iron gates sealed its entrance. The sign above had faded, the letters barely visible. Rosenfeld Sanatorium and Church Archive. Ravens circled the towers. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots as she crossed the courtyard. Inside, the corridors were narrow and dim, lined with doors that hadn't opened in years. She found a caretaker sweeping dust near the front desk, an old man with hollow eyes. "I need to see the church records," Elise said, her voice thin but steady. "From St. Maria's orphanage." The caretaker frowned. "Those records are sealed, Fräulein. Only clergy or family can—" "I am family," she cut in, pulling out the baptism paper she'd found among the ruins. Her hand shook as she held it out. The man studied the document for a long time. Then, without a word, he nodded toward the back hall. "3rd floor. Storage room 6. You didn't hear that from me." She climbed the creaking stairs, each one echoing into the vast emptiness. Her breath fogged in the cold. When she reached the 3rd floor, she found the door marked with a brass plate, Archive 6. Inside were rows upon rows of ledgers stacked on steel shelves. The smell of mildew hung thick in the air. She began scanning the bindings, her fingers tracing over decades of names, until finally, she found it, St. Maria's Orphanage Records, 1912 to 1916. She opened it on a table by the window. The ink had faded, but the entries were still legible. There it was again, Elise and Wilhelm Hartmann, twins. But beside their names, a faint note had been added years later. Subject of confidential study. Genetic kinship confirmation ordered, 1930. Her pulse spiked. She flipped the page. Pinned to the next sheet was a laboratory report from Munich University. The paper was stamped with the red seal of the Institute for Hereditary Research, dated just 2 months earlier. And in that moment, everything fell into place. The test results confirmed the obvious. Elise and Wilhelm shared identical blood markers, unmistakably siblings. But what terrified her wasn't the confirmation. It was the line written beneath it, requested by Friedrich Mahler. Her hand went cold. He had known. He had known the entire time. The room began to spin. She staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. A memory returned. The way he'd watched her that first night, the way he'd touched her hand when he asked about her family. He hadn't been curious. He'd been checking. He'd wanted to be sure. The door creaked open behind her. "Elise," came his voice, calm, quiet, almost tender. She turned slowly. There he stood, framed in the doorway, snow melting from his coat, his face pale as parchment. In his hand, he held a small revolver, not pointed, but visible. "I told you not to come here," he said softly. "You weren't supposed to see that." Tears filled her eyes. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew, before the wedding." Friedrich's jaw tightened. "I needed to be certain. I thought, maybe the tests were wrong. Maybe fate was cruel, and I could still choose to love you." "Love," she choked out. "This isn't love, Friedrich. It's madness." He stepped closer, his eyes hollow. "Do you think I don't know that? Every night I pray it's not true. Every night I wake and wish I'd never found you again." The revolver trembled slightly in his hand, though he didn't raise it. "But we were alone, Elise. The war took everything from us. Our names, our past. We only had each other left." She backed away, clutching the blood report to her chest. "You don't understand. This isn't something you can hide." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over his face. "You're right. It can't be hidden." He placed the revolver on the table between them. "Then we'll make sure no one ever finds us." Before she could react, he turned and walked out into the hall. She called after him, her voice breaking, but his footsteps faded down the stairs, slow, deliberate, echoing until they vanished into the silence. Elise stood alone in the archive room, the blood test still clutched in her trembling hands. Outside, snow began to fall again, drifting against the tall windows like silent ash. And in that moment, she realized that truth had done what the fire could not. It had burned them both beyond saving. By the time Elise returned to the town of Königsbruck, the snow had buried the streets in silence. No one stood outside, no smoke rose from the chimneys. The entire village seemed to be holding its breath. She found Friedrich's house locked, the curtains drawn. Only faint traces of boot prints led away from the door, down toward the forest. The same forest where years ago 2 children had once been abandoned. The next morning, the priest, Father Anselm, arrived at her door. His face was pale, his eyes tired. He held his hat in both hands, twisting the brim nervously. "Elise," he said quietly. "They found him. Near the river." Her breath caught. "He's alive." The priest shook his head. The ice gave way. "They think he didn't fight it." She said nothing. There were no tears left, just an ache, deep, endless, hollow. Father Anselm sighed, glancing down the road where villagers whispered behind frosted windows. "The town knows," he said finally, "about the records. The papers from Rosenfeld." Her heart stilled. "They know everything? Enough to condemn you both," he said softly. "They believe what they want to believe, that your marriage was a sin, that you deceived the church." "But I didn't know," she whispered. He nodded. "I told them that. They don't care. They need someone to carry the shame. And the dead can't speak, so it's me," she finished, her voice breaking. He hesitated, then said, "There's talk of an annulment, of excommunication. But if you leave quietly, tonight, I can help you reach Dresden. There's a convent there that might take you in." Elise looked past him toward the white hills. Somewhere beyond them lay Friedrich's body, buried beneath the ice, unreachable. The snowflakes melted on her eyelashes as she whispered, "He loved me, Father, even when he shouldn't have." "I know," the priest said, "but love doesn't always mean salvation." That night, Elise packed a small bag, just a few clothes, her wedding ring, and the paper she'd found in the orphanage rubble. She left without saying goodbye to anyone. As she crossed the empty square, she noticed something. The townspeople had already begun erasing her. Her name had been scraped off the church registry. Her wedding photograph, once displayed in the tailor's shop, was gone. Even the gossip had stopped, not for mercy, but from agreement. The town had decided she never existed. Years later, Villagers would still whisper about the bride of Königsbruck. They said she'd brought a curse to the valley, that the snow fell heavier each winter after she left. Children dared each other to visit the frozen river where her husband had drowned, claiming you could still hear his voice beneath the ice, calling a woman's name. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that Elise lived, far from the town, under a different name. She found shelter in the Dresden convent, where she cleaned floors and tended the sick. She spoke little, prayed often, and never wore her wedding ring again. Sometimes at night she would dream of Friedrich, his face half in shadow, whispering words she could no longer remember. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, unsure if they were for him or for the life they might have had. One morning, years later, a letter arrived at the convent. It bore no return address, only a simple wax seal, pressed with a familiar mark, the Hartmann crest. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Elise, I forgive you. And if there is mercy left in this world, I hope you forgive me too. There was no signature, no explanation. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was his. She pressed the letter to her chest, trembling. And though she knew it was impossible, though she'd seen his grave, though she'd watched the ice close over the river, she swore she could hear his voice again, whispering through the walls of the convent, "We were never meant to be found." The snow fell outside that day, just as it had the night she left Königsbruck, soft, unending, like the silence of a world that had chosen to forget. But in her heart, Elise carried everything: the love, the shame, the truth no one would speak aloud. And somewhere deep in the frozen woods of Germany, the town that buried its sins beneath the snow slept soundly, believing the past had been silenced forever. In the winter of 1935, 5 years after her flight from Königsbruck, the past returned, quietly, like frost creeping under a locked door. It began when the convent received a letter from the Ministry of Records, requesting permission to access baptism archives. Elise, who now went by the name Sister Clara, was tasked with sorting through the old church registries. She opened the box and froze. The seal on one envelope bore the same faded crest she'd seen years ago, the Hartmann crest. Her hands trembled. The edges of the parchment were brittle, the ink faintly blue. Inside was a government request form, signed by an official from the Institute for Ancestral Purity, one of the new departments born from Germany's obsession with bloodlines and family tracing. They were looking for documentation about a child born in Königsbruck in 1931. The name field was blurred by water damage, but the surname was unmistakable: Hartmann. Elise's heart stopped. She had never told anyone, not even Father Anselm. Not about that last night with Friedrich. Not about what she'd carried after. A child she'd left at the convent before disappearing into a new identity, believing it safer if the world never knew whose blood ran in its veins. She had begged the sisters not to tell her where the baby went, and they'd agreed. "For both your sakes," Mother Agnes had said. "The world doesn't need to know who its parents were." And now, after 5 years of silence, someone in the government was asking about that child. Elise felt the walls close in. Outside, snow fell thicker by the hour, and the convent bell tolled through the storm. She locked herself in the archive room, pulling out every record she could find. But the birth certificate was gone. Not missing, removed. In its place was a small envelope. Inside lay a single sheet of paper written in neat, careful handwriting. "The past does not sleep. The blood always remembers." The words made her knees weaken. She staggered backward, staring at the paper as if it could burn her. That night, unable to rest, she walked out into the courtyard. Snow covered the ground in a perfect white sheet. The chapel's candles flickered in the windows, glowing like eyes in the dark. And then she heard it, a faint sound beneath the wind. A voice, a whisper. "Elise," she turned sharply. No one was there. Only the rustle of the trees, the crunch of her boots in the snow. But then it came again, closer this time, unmistakable. A man's voice carried by the wind. "They will come for the child." Her breath fogged in the air. "Friedrich," she whispered into the night. No answer. Just the sound of snowflakes landing softly on her sleeves, silent, endless, and cold. The next morning, a black car appeared outside the convent gates. Two men in dark coats stepped out, carrying folders marked with the Reichseagle seal. They spoke to Mother Agnes for a long time before leaving. When the Mother Superior returned, her face was pale. "Sister Clara," she said quietly, "they asked about you. About your time in Königsbruck, and about a child." Elise's stomach turned to ice. "I told them we have no such record," Mother Agnes continued, "but they said they'll be back." That night, Elise packed her things once again, the same way she had done years ago. But this time, she didn't run for herself. She ran for her child. She didn't know where the child was, or what name it bore now, but she knew she had to find it before the men in the black coats did. She left the convent under the cover of a snowstorm. The road was silent except for the crunch of her boots and the distant howl of wolves. Behind her, the church bell tolled once, low, heavy, like a warning from the dead. And in the swirling white, she thought she saw a figure standing near the tree line, a tall man, coat billowing in the wind. His face was hidden, but she knew. She knew. Friedrich, or the memory of him. He raised a hand slowly, pointing toward the north, toward Königsbruck. The wind roared, and when she blinked, he was gone. Only the whisper remained, circling her like the snow. The past does not sleep. And so, with a trembling heart and a suitcase full of ghosts, Elise began the journey back to the one place she swore she'd never see again, the town that buried her name, and perhaps her child's fate along with it. The train crawled through the white hills like a ghost cutting through fog. Elise sat near the back, her coat pulled tight, her hands trembling in her lap. The countryside passed in flashes, ruined barns, empty fields, and skeletal trees heavy with snow. Each mile carried her closer to the one place she feared most, Königsbruck. She hadn't seen it since the winter she fled. But when the train finally hissed to a stop at the old station, it was as if time itself had been trapped under the ice. The platform was empty. The same crooked sign hung above the depot, half buried in frost. Even the air felt the same, sharp, heavy, unforgiving. As she stepped onto the platform, the world seemed to go still. The silence was total. No birds, no wind, no life. Only the faint hum of memory. She walked the familiar path down the hill into town. Most of the houses were abandoned now, doors hanging off hinges, roofs caved in. A generation of war and whispers had emptied Königsbruck of its people. When she reached the old church, she stopped. The wooden doors were warped, the cross above the bell tower broken. Her breath caught as she saw the faint outline of her wedding portrait still burned into the wall, a ghostly shadow where the frame once hung. It was here she realized that the story began, and where it would end. Inside, the church was colder than the snow outside. The pews were covered in dust, the altar draped in torn cloth. As she stepped forward, her boot struck something metallic, a small tin box half buried beneath the debris. She knelt and opened it. Inside were 2 silver rings and a letter sealed with wax. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, deliberate, filled with pain. "Elise, if you are reading this, it means you came back. I prayed you wouldn't, but I knew you would. You were always the one who couldn't let ghosts rest. The child is safe. I made sure of it before the river took me. They will grow up far from this cursed name, far from the blood that binds us. I only ask that you never look for them. Forgive me, for what I knew, for what I hid, for what I loved." Friedrich Elise's tears fell silently onto the page. For a moment, she could almost feel him beside her again, the warmth of his hand, the echo of his voice, the love that had ruined them both. Then she saw something else inside the box, a small photograph. Faded, water-damaged, but still visible. A young child, perhaps 3 years old, smiling faintly in front of a cottage. Written on the back in the same hand were 4 words, "Their name is Anna." Elise pressed the photo to her heart, sobbing quietly. The sound echoed through the empty church. filling the cold space with something human again. She stayed there for hours, unable to move. When night fell, the snow outside turned silver under the moonlight, blanketing the graves behind the church. And then footsteps. Slow. Crunching through snow. Approaching. She froze. The door creaked open. A woman entered, tall, wrapped in a dark coat, her hair the color of wheat. Her face was pale, her eyes gray, and in her hands, she held a folded piece of paper. "Are you Elise Hartmann?" the woman asked softly. Elise stared, unable to speak. The name hadn't been spoken aloud in years. The woman stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "My name is Anna Muller," she said. "I was told you might know something about my parents." Elise's world stopped. The room seemed to tilt, the air vanishing from her lungs. She looked at the photograph in her hand. The same eyes, the same faint smile. It was her. The daughter she thought she'd lost to secrecy, to time, to guilt. Elise's knees buckled, and she fell into the pew, sobbing. "You came back," she whispered. "You shouldn't have, but you did." Anna knelt beside her, confused but calm. "I had to know," she said quietly. "All my life, people have told me I was adopted from a convent. No one would tell me who I truly was." Elise reached out, brushing a trembling hand across the girl's cheek. "Your father loved you," she whispered. "He loved you enough to let the world forget him." Outside, the snow began to fall harder, sealing the old church from the world. The bells, silent for years, gave one low, mournful toll, as if marking the end of a curse. Anna took her hand gently. "Then it's over," she said. Elise nodded through tears. "No," she whispered. "The past never ends. But maybe it can rest." They left the church together, mother and daughter, walking through the snowfall toward the quiet hills where the river once froze over. Behind them, Königsbruck slept, a town built on secrets, finally blanketed in peace. As they disappeared into the white, the wind carried a whisper through the trees, faint, familiar, eternal. The past does not sleep, but love endures. And then the snow covered everything, leaving only silence.